It was supposed to be an ordinary Monday. I arrived early, as I had done for more than 15 years, and slid my car into the space near the entrance. I didn't notice the small plaque with a freshly printed name, Adrian Cole. To me, it was just another day, another week of numbers to hit and clients to call. I was halfway across the lot when a sharp slam of a car door cut through the air. A tall man in an expensive suit stormed toward me, his face already flushed. His voice carried across the parking lot, gathering an audience of employees on their way inside. "Get out, this place isn't for you!" he shouted, his fingers stabbing the air in my direction. For a moment, I froze, unsure what he was even talking about. Then his gaze darted to the spot I had just parked in, and it clicked. The parking space. That was all this was about. I opened my mouth to explain, but he cut me off. His voice louder, designed for spectacle rather than conversation. "Do you even know who I am?" I looked around and saw the stunned faces of colleagues, some whispering, some wide-eyed. A new boss. I realized, though I hadn't even been introduced, his first impression wasn't a handshake or a greeting, but a public display of dominance. I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest, the instinct to defend myself, to fire back words that could sting. But instead, I chose silence. With a faint smile, I straightened my shoulders and walked toward the entrance without a word. His rant echoed behind me, punctuated by the violent slam of his car door. Inside, the office buzzed with whispers. I caught fragments. That was Evelyn, right over a parking spot. He doesn't even know who she is. I kept my head high, pretending not to hear, but every step pressed the humiliation deeper into me. By the time I reached my desk, I knew this was not just a bad introduction. It was a warning of storms ahead, and they were coming faster than anyone imagined. By the afternoon, the sting of the morning had dulled, but the whispers hadn't. I had buried myself in calls, trying to pretend nothing had happened. When the email arrived, report to HR immediately, my stomach tightened. I walked in to find Adrian already seated across from Denise, his posture smug, legs crossed like a king awaiting his subject. Denise's eyes flickered with unease, but Adrian wasted no time. "There's no place for you here," he said, voice dripping with certainty. "Leave today." I inhaled slowly, forcing myself to meet his eyes. "After 15 years, that's all you have to say." Denise leaned forward, her tone careful but firm. "Adrian, at least review her profile. Evelyn has been with us for 15 years. She's our top." He sliced the air with his hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. "I don't need to see a file. I've seen enough. She's done here." The words landed like a gavel striking a courtroom bench. Final. Cold. Meant to humiliate. Through the glass walls of the HR office, I noticed heads turning. His voice wasn't quiet, it was loud enough to be overheard. The humiliation wasn't an accident, it was a performance. I straightened my back, letting the calm settle in. "If that's your decision," I said, my tone steady. "Fine." I gathered my things with deliberate slowness, refusing to let him see a tremor in my hands. As I stepped out into the hall, the murmurs followed me like a tide. Did he just fire her? He didn't even read her profile. Isn't she our top salesperson? Each whisper twisted the knife, but not in me and him. They didn't know it yet. But the seeds of doubt were already taking root. I walked toward my desk, every step a quiet declaration. This was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning of his unraveling. By the time I returned to my desk, the office was buzzing louder than usual. No one spoke directly to me, but I could feel the eyes. The whispers trailed after me like shadows. He just fired her. Doesn't he know she's the one keeping this place alive? She's the reason 90% of our clients even stay. I kept my gaze steady. But inside, a quiet ache settled in. 15 years of work, brushed aside in less than 15 minutes. To Adrian, I was just another employee. But to the clients, I was their Evelyn. I thought of the birthdays I never forgot sending flowers to a client's wife, handwritten cards to their children. I remembered the nights I stayed past midnight to finalize a contract so a nervous startup could keep its doors open. The funerals I attended, standing silently beside grieving families, not because it was my job, but because it was human. I wasn't just selling services. I was building trust, brick by brick, year after year. Those bonds had cost me more than I admitted. My daughter's school plays, missed soccer games, family dinners eaten cold at the kitchen counter because I'd been on the road. I sacrificed moments I could never get back, believing it would all mean something, that loyalty would be repaid in kind. And yet, here I was, dismissed with a flick of arrogance. Across the hall, I caught two younger associates staring, one mouthing, "She's the queen of sales." The title wasn't official, but it was true. I had carried this company on my back more times than anyone could count, and now Adrian had tossed me aside without even glancing at my record. I gathered a small box of belongings, not because I was finished, but because I knew the storm brewing outside these walls would reach him sooner than he expected. As I shut my drawer for the last time, my phone buzzed with a familiar number, a client, the first of many. The box on my desk was barely half full when the first call came through, then another, and another. My phone didn't stop vibrating, as if the clients could sense what had happened before I had even told them. "Evelyn, tell me this isn't true." One voice pleaded. "They said you're leaving. If you go, we go with you." Another client, quieter but firm. "Wherever you go, we'll follow." I closed my office door, sinking into the chair that had been mine for over a decade. The weight of their words pressed against me, heavier than the termination notice Adrian thought would silence me. Loyalty wasn't built overnight. It was carved into late evenings, handwritten notes, last-minute flights when a deal threatened to collapse. I thought of the times I sat in airport lounges, still in a suit, eating cold sandwiches instead of dinner with my daughter. The holidays where my presence was a voice on the phone instead of a seat at the table. The plays and recitals I missed, promising I'd be at the next one. Those sacrifices had a cost, but now I saw their value reflected in the voices on the other end of the line. Meanwhile, the industry newsfeed blinked across my laptop. Adrian's face stared back at me from a glossy magazine cover. His grin stretched wide. Bold reforms for a new era. The headline read, "He was already selling himself as the visionary who would reshape the company." I stared at the photo, wondering if he had any idea what was slipping through his fingers. A company is only as strong as the trust it holds, and that trust had never belonged to him. Another call lit up my phone, a name I recognized instantly. I answered, already knowing what they would say. After the fourth call that afternoon, I silenced my phone and leaned back, letting the memories wash over me. It wasn't just contracts and numbers these clients remembered, it was the years I had given them. The sacrifices stacked one on top of another until they formed the shape of my life. I saw myself again in those endless airport terminals, rolling suitcase in one hand, laptop bag cutting into my shoulder. Nights blurred into mornings under fluorescent lights, coffee keeping me upright when sleep was only a luxury. I dial into conference calls from boarding gates, sealing agreements while other passengers shuffled past with their holiday plans. Weekends were no different. My family gathered at home while I stayed behind in sterile hotel rooms. Contracts spread across the desk. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, quiet dinners. My daughter used to leave drawings on the fridge with "For Mom" scrawled across the top, reminders of the moment slipping through my fingers. Through it all, I carried my mother's words like a compass. Dignity is worth more than any paycheck. At the time, I thought she meant to guard myself against arrogance or greed. Now I understood she meant something deeper, that no matter how much I gave, I could never let anyone strip me of who I was. Adrian thought he had taken everything from me in that HR room, dismissing me with a single wave of his hand. But he couldn't touch the years I had invested or the loyalty born from them. That foundation didn't belong to him, and it never would. I rose from my chair, brushing away the haze of memory. My phone lit up again with another familiar name. This wasn't just nostalgia, it was proof. Proof that the trust I had built was stronger than the title he tried to erase. I picked up the phone, steady and certain, knowing this was only the beginning of what he would lose. It didn't take long for the first crack to appear. 2 days after my dismissal, an email landed in the general inbox, addressed to Adrian himself. I wasn't supposed to see it, but word traveled quickly in an office where gossip ran faster than policy. The message was brief, almost painfully. So our trusted partner, Evelyn Carter, is no longer with you. Therefore, we are terminating our contract effective immediately. I read the forwarded copy twice, my name etched there like a quiet signature of truth. 15 years of partnership gone in one sentence. And not because of pricing or competition, because I was gone. Adrian called an emergency meeting that morning, his voice sharper than usual. This is an isolated decision, he insisted, pacing the room. One client, hardly significant, but the tremor in his tone betrayed him. He knew what I knew, that trust, once broken, spreads like a stain. I sat in my living room later that night, the email still glowing on my phone. I remembered the faces behind that contract, the CEO whose daughter I once sent a graduation gift, the assistant I comforted when her husband passed away. Those weren't transactions. They were relationships carved into years of consistency, and Adrian had severed them with a single reckless order. He thought contracts held people in place. I knew better. Loyalty was stronger than signatures on paper, stronger than any clause written in ink. It was built over dinners shared after long meetings, handwritten notes in times of grief, phone calls answered at midnight. And that loyalty wasn't his to command. I leaned back into the couch, strangely calm. If one had walked away this easily, the others wouldn't be far behind. This wasn't the end of a contract, it was the beginning of an exodus. The next morning, my phone rang again. Another client. The dominoes had only just started to fall. The email that ended the first contract was only the beginning. Within days, the trickle became a flood, one by one. Clients I had nurtured for years sent their notices, some brief and formal, others blunt in their disappointment. Each letter echoed the same refrain: if Evelyn is not with you, neither are we. I didn't need to make a single call. My phone lit up day and night with voices steady in their loyalty. When you're ready, we'll move with you. Our account follows you. Not the logo on the letterhead. Tell us where to sign. I listened quietly, jotting down their promises, my heart heavy and proud all at once. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, they were lives and businesses that had trusted me to carry them through storms. And now, they were returning the favor. Inside the office, the whispers grew louder. I heard from former colleagues that meetings had turned tense, morale crumbling as Adrian scrambled to explain the exodus. The new boss fired the wrong person, they murmured in hallways, careful not to be overheard. I imagined Adrian pacing his office, phone pressed tight to his ear as another client delivered the same verdict he had once thrown at me. There's no place for you here. He had thought firing me would be a show of authority. Instead, it revealed how little authority he actually had. From my living room, I watched the collapse like dominoes falling in slow motion. Each client that walked away wasn't just revenue lost, it was a story he could never rewrite. A bridge burned beyond repair. And still, the calls kept coming. The loyalty I had once poured out in silence was now returning to me, stronger than any contract, louder than any headline. By the end of the week, the company I had built my life around was crumbling at its core, and Adrian was left scrambling for a grip that would only slip further. The panic was coming for him next. News of the exodus traveled faster than even I expected. By the second week, the board was in chaos, revenues spiraling down with every contract terminated, and Adrian, so smug on his first day, was unraveling. He called clients personally, I heard, at first with confidence, then with desperation. He offered steep discounts, slashed fees, anything to keep them tethered, but the responses came back the same, clear and unwavering. If Evelyn isn't there, neither are we. I pictured him in those calls, his tone shifting from charm to pleading, his polished words fraying at the edges. He thought authority was enough to command loyalty. He was learning the hardest lesson: respect cannot be bought after it's been thrown away. Inside the office, the whispers hardened into open mutters. Friends still working there called me at night, their voices hushed but tinged with awe. He destroyed the company in weeks, one said. Everything you built, gone, because he couldn't swallow his pride. I felt no joy in their words, only a quiet affirmation. The truth was surfacing, not because I fought for it, but because it could no longer stay hidden. Adrian had exposed himself. I kept answering calls, each one from a client ready to sign with me wherever I chose to land. I wrote down their promises neatly in a notebook, each name a reminder that my value had never depended on the building I once walked into. Meanwhile, Adrian's photo disappeared from the industry magazines that had once praised his bold reforms. The same reporters now whispered about failure, about arrogance masking incompetence. His empire of bluster was collapsing, and everyone could see it. I knew it was only a matter of time before our paths crossed again, this time not in a parking lot, but in a place where the whole industry could witness the truth. The industry gala was held in one of those grand hotel ballrooms, chandeliers glittering above a sea of familiar faces. I hadn't planned to attend, but with so many clients asking me to join their tables, my absence would have spoken louder than my presence. So I arrived quietly, in a simple black dress, determined to keep my head high. I had barely stepped into the room when I felt the tension shift. Conversations faltered, eyes flicked toward the entrance, and then I saw him, Adrian, red-faced, glass of whiskey clenched in his hand, striding across the floor like a man on trial. "You cost me this company," he spat, loud enough for the crowd to hear. His voice cracked under the weight of his own anger, but he didn't care. He wanted blood, and he wanted it publicly. I let the silence hang for a moment, the kind that makes people lean in. Then I looked at him, steady and unflinching. "No," I said, my tone calm but sharp enough to cut. "You did. The moment you fired me without reading my profile." The words settled over the room like a stone dropped in still water, rippling outward. I saw it in their faces, the board members, the clients, the competitors, each of them registering the truth they had already suspected. Adrian staggered back half a step, his mouth opening and closing without sound. For the first time since I had known him, he looked small, not powerful and not feared, just exposed. People began to turn away from him, their conversations resuming, laughter rising again, but not with him. He stood alone in the center of the ballroom, his reputation cracking like glass beneath a hammer. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The echo of my words carried farther than his shouting ever had. Adrian's empire wasn't stolen by me. It was hollowed out by his arrogance. And now the entire industry had witnessed the collapse. I left him standing there. The murmur of clients greeting me with handshakes and warm smiles. Ahead of me waited a new offer, a new office, and a desk where my family photo would sit once more. Within weeks of that gala, the calls turned into signatures. Contracts that once anchored my old company were now inked under a new letterhead this time, with a competitor who had offered me more than a position. They offered me recognition, respect, and the freedom to lead without apology. I stepped into my new office on a bright Monday morning, sunlight cutting across polished floors. A fresh nameplate gleamed on the door, Director of Client Relations. It wasn't just a title, it was validation. Boxes filled with files from clients sat waiting on my desk. 90% of my accounts had followed me, some without hesitation, others with words that warmed me more than any paycheck ever could. We trust you, Evelyn. Always have, always will. I spent those first days not rebuilding, but continuing, as if the rupture had been nothing more than a detour. Meetings were filled with familiar faces, smiles that reminded me of the bridges I had built over years of sacrifice. The new team respected me instantly, not because of a title on paper, but because they saw what my clients saw: a partner, not just a salesperson. Meanwhile, Adrian faded into the background of the industry he once tried to dominate. Rumors spread that he had taken a consulting job in another field, his name mentioned now only as a cautionary tale. Remember, Cole, people would whisper, the one who fired his top performer over a parking spot. His downfall needed no embellishment. The truth was dramatic enough. One evening, as the office grew quiet, I unpacked the last of my things. From the box, I pulled out the photo of my family, the one that had sat on every desk I'd ever worked at. I placed it carefully beside my monitor, a silent reminder of everything I had given and everything I had regained. I sat back in my chair, the hum of the building steady around me, and whispered to myself my place was never in the lobby. It was always with the clients who knew my worth. And with that truth, I turned toward the future, ready for the next chapter, waiting just beyond the horizon.